Korea. Once it was called as a land of morning calm. Now, it is a symbol of economic miracle. Within one generation, it turned from the ashes of the war to the land of the affluences. Hi, I'm Dr. Choong Lyol LEE, a professor of economics in Korean University at Sejong in Korea. For the past 60 years, I have witnessed Korea's economic and social development. For 40 years, I have studied economic theories. For 20 years, I've been involved in many consultation projects on developing countries. Based on my experience and knowledge, I'm telling you the story behind the miracle of economic development of Korea. Many people tell that Korea is one of the best examples of economic and social development in the late 20th century and early 21st century. Generally, people called it an economic miracle of Korea. But if you ask them what happened in Korea, or what has changed in Korea for these years, or was it really a miracle? Then they don't talk much, or they may be silent. Some people show the pictures in K-pop music video or Korean movies because this picture shows a well-organized cities of Korea or a fancy modern high-street buildings of Korea. Or others mentioned some of the global Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics or Hyundai Motor Car companies, etc. They may be an answer for the general public. However, if you are an economist, or a college student, or a government officer, or a journalist, or any person who is interested in the topic of economic development or economic growth of your country, it may not be a proper answer. We have to give a very specific scientific evidence. Today, I'm going to do it. When we discuss the degree of economic development, we generally use some statistical indicators. I think one of the most commonly used one is the GDP per capita. The GDP per capita means the GDP per person. It is estimated as the GDP divided by number of population. Then you may ask, what is a GDP? GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. The GDP is a monetary measure of the market value of the final goods and services produced in a specific time period. In short, it means the total amount of production generally for a year. If something is produced, then it should be consumed. Therefore, GDP means not only amount of production, but also amount of consumption. For this reason, GDP per capita may represent the living standard of an average people of the country. At the same time, the rise of GDP per capita indicates the improvement of living standard of the people on average. On the other hand, GDP per capita can be used to compare the living standard across the countries. If the one country's GDP per capita is higher than that of the other country, you may say that its living standard is better than that of the other country. The figure 1 shows the GDP per capita of Korea about 65 years from 1953 to 2019. It looks very surprising because the size of the bar, the GDP per capita of Korea, has increased so much and so fast for a very long time. Let's look at it more in detail. 1953, just after the 3 years of Korean War, Korea's annual GDP per capita was only $65.7. However, it reached $31,838.2 in 2019. In other words, it increased by 484.5 times for these years. It means that living standard of average Korean people has improved quite substantially for these years. This is one of the reasons why people call it economic miracle. The GDP per capita of Korea reached $100 in 1962 and passed $1,000 in 1977. In 1989, it went to $5,000 and finally get the $10,000 in 1994. During the 1997 and 1998, Korea experienced a financial crisis and had a very hard time. Korea was the center of Asian financial crisis, and consequently, its GDP per capita fell about by 25%. However, surprisingly, it bounced up very quickly and finally reached $20,000 in 2006. In 2008 and 2009, when the global financial crisis occurred, Korea's GDP per capita also fell substantially. However, it succeeded in rebounding again and reached to the $30,000 in 2017. No wonder that Korea is called as a miracle country. If you compare the GDP per capita of Korea with other countries, you will be more surprised. The figure shows the GDP per capita of 13 countries across the world from 1960 to the 2019 by every 10 years. They include Korea, India, Thailand in Asia, Ghana, Kenya, and Senegal in Africa, Iran and Turkey in Middle East, Argentina and Brazil in Latin America, and finally Greece, Spain, and Portugal in Europe. By this figure, we may check the movement of the GDP per capita of these countries for the past 60 years. It shows that Korea's GDP per capita, the red bar, was the lowest one among these 13 countries in 1960. But it also showed that Korea's GDP per capita passed those of other countries as time went by. For example, in 1970s, Korea's GDP per capita passed those of the Asian countries. In 1980s, it passed the African countries, and 1990s, it did those of the Middle East country and Latin American countries. And finally, as we see in 2019, it exceeds those of some European countries. We may show 5 or more practical indicators rather than GDP per capita. Let me show the life expectancy statistics. It is generally known that better living condition gives a higher life expectancy or longer life. Good nutrition and good healthcare services extend the average lifespan. According to these figures, the average life expectancy was only 51.2 years in 1960 in Korea. But it lost every year and finally reached 82.7 years in 2020. So the people in 2020 lives longer than the people in 1960s by 31.5 years or by 61.5%. It is quite surprising. Let's look at the other indicators representing the quality of living standard. This time, I choose the amount of per capita meat consumption in Korea. Meat include beef, pork, and chicken. In 1965, the average Korean ate only 3.4 kilograms of meat per year, or 0.25 kilograms of meat per month. I do remember that my family was able to eat meat only in some important days, such as a New Year Day or birthday of my father, my brother's graduation day, and etc. However, he ate 53.9 kilograms of meat in 2018. It means 1 kilogram of meat per year. For these 53 years, average meat consumption increased by 15.9 times, not by the 15.9%. Famous Korean barbecue, so-called bulgogi or bulgalbi, became popular through that times. Family and friends are enjoying the beef, pork, and chicken almost every day. Let me show the another indicator representing the quality of living standard. This time, I choose the number of passenger cars in Korea. Having a car is a symbol of success of many developing countries. It means that he can go wherever he likes to go by himself. He may drive his car to go shopping or take his family on vacation. As people have more cars, they will have more travel and more leisure time and more enjoying their lives. This figure shows the number of passenger cars per 1,000 population. It clearly shows that number of cars increases very much for these years. In 1960s, there were only 0.3 passenger cars per 1,000 person in Korea. So it was not common to see the cars on the street. But in 2020, 372 cars exist per 1,000 population. Considering that average size of the family is 3 in Korea, it means that almost every house has his own car. Of course, these are the only numbers. To see the evidence of the development, we must see the changes of the life of the people. I like to show some interesting pictures to you at this time. The first picture was taken by American soldiers in 1954, just right after the Korean War. It described the refugee camp nearby Daegu area. Boys and girls of age 5 to 10 are standing on the line with their bowls. Why they are standing with the bowls? Very simple. They like to have the food delivered by American GI, maybe candies and cookies. Now, they may be about 80 years old man and woman or grandpa and grandma. The second picture shows the disconnected and broken bridge of Han River. Before the war, it was the only bridge in Seoul connecting the northern part with the southern part. As you see, it was destroyed and disconnected during the wartime. Actually, it took 8 years to fully recover the bridges. Now, we may see some pictures of Korea today. Having enough food is not an issue anymore. There are so many gourmet food restaurants in Korea. You can eat Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese, Indian, Italian, French, and American, etc., etc. For infrastructures, Korea is equipped with one of the best infrastructures in the world. It has a large amount of highway and railroad. Seoul has more than 20 bridges passing through the Han River. Internet connectivity of Korea is regarded as the best in the world. In any places in Korea, people are connected through the internet. 5G services introduced in Korea for the first time in the world. Today, I reviewed Korea's economic and social development for the past half century. I show that Korea's GDP per capita increased very much for years, and the living standard of the people also improved quite much. As I said before, I am the witness of all these changes and development. Also, I am a member of this society to build up this remarkable achievement. In this sense, I'm very proud of it. In conclusion, Korean economy showed a very remarkable achievement for the past 60 years. And it may be reasonable to call it an economic miracle. Next time, I will continue these lectures on Korea's economic development more in detail. See you next time.